Good morning, everyone. This is Glenn Austin, and we're going to be starting our live broadcast of the Community Rating System Credits for Flood Warning webinar in just a moment. Well, good morning. It is 11 a.m. in the East, and I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us on our first National Hydrologic Warning Council sponsored live broadcast. I'm Glenn Austin and the Executive Director of the National Hydrologic Warning Council. Good morning, everybody. Since 1993, the National Hydrologic Warning Council has been assisting emergency, floodplain, and environmental management officials by providing training and expert advice on the use of real-time, high-quality hydrologic information from automated remote data systems with the goals of protecting lives, property, and the environment. We do this in many ways, including conducting regional workshops, national conferences, and now webinars. As you will learn in this webinar, having a flood warning system will not only help protect and reduce lives and property losses, it also help reduce flood insurance premiums through the additional community rating system credits. Annual flood losses are now close to $10 billion in the United States. The National Flood Insurance Program provides money to compensate for approximately $1.5 billion of those flood losses, and effective use of flood warning systems placed in strategic locations could also provide an additional 20% flood loss reduction. These opportunities must not be ignored, and we're here to help you understand how to value those flood warning systems and install them and maintain them properly. You can keep track of the National Hydrologic Warning Council on Facebook, and I will show you, this is our homepage. Our address on the web is www.hydrologicwarning.org. You'll guide through the pages using the menu on the left. And you can also follow us on Facebook. This is a copy of our photograph of our San Diego conference coming up this year in 2013. I'll be talking a little bit later on in this presentation about the opportunity to join us in Florida. I want to run through a short set of instructions for today's webinar before we begin. The system does not allow you to speak to others on the webinar. If you need our attention during the webinar, please post a message in the chat box found in the control panel on the right. We're going to be collecting questions throughout the webinar, but we won't be addressing those questions until the end of the webinar. So you can simply submit a question by typing them into the question box also found in the control panel on the right. Questions, like I said, will be held until both of our speakers have ended their presentations. Devin Post, our administrative assistant, will then go through each question. If for some reason we run out of time, we'll create a summary of all the questions and answers and post them on our website that I've just shown you. If you need technical assistance during this webinar, you can call 800-263-6317. At this point, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is going to be Mr. Al Goodman. Al is a certified floodplain manager and is the principal of AWG Consulting. Al serves as a consultant to FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program's Community Rating System Task Force. And before retiring earlier this year, Al was the Mississippi Flood Insurance Program State Coordinator, and Al also served as the chair of the Association of State Floodplain Managers from 2007 to 2009. Dr. David Curtis is the current president of the National Hydrologic Warning Council and will be our second presenter today. Dave is the vice president of West Consultants, and for 3 decades, Dave has been involved in the design, development, and implementation of award-winning innovations in more than 50 automated environmental flood monitoring systems across the United States and in 18 countries abroad. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Al to begin his presentation.
Thank you, Glenn. Let me see if I can get the screen to come up. Here we go. Good morning, everyone. This brief presentation is not meant to give you, say, a down-in-the-weeds view of the 600 series and the 2013 manual. There have been several past webinars and sessions which have focused on those details. I'll encourage y'all to look again at the manual that's posted, or you can see the URL on the bottom left of the slide, which I think you can see my arrow. If you go there, you can download the entire manual. What we're going to really talk about today, other than the entire manual, of course, the 600 Warning and Response Series. This is the series of credits that measures what a community does to protect life and property during a flood through their flood warning systems. As you can see from this chart, I have it split up between the 2007 and 2012/13 manuals. In their side, the red box, you can see the points that's assigned presently. And in this blue box, what is the new manual's point spread. You can see there's quite a bit of difference in some of them. I'd like to point out that at this point, only 2 communities receive 620 credit. That's Lincoln, Nebraska, and they get 312 points. And Burlington, Washington, which received 135 points. I think the Mississippi River flood in '93 and Katrina in 2005 seem to have discouraged communities for applying for that levy credit. Of the 1,101 communities that received the state dam safety credits and Activity 630, only 2 received the DFP credits. That is Maricopa County, Arizona, and they get 12.5 points, and Monterey, California, which received 6.25 points. And here's the numbers presently as of October the 1st of this year. There are 1,129 communities in the CRS. 485 received points in 610, 2 in 620, and 1,101 in 630, which is the SDS credit. So that's about 45% of the communities in CRS receive points in the 610 series. So that'd be the majority. I'd like to point out on that website shown here in this URL, we have a self-assessment that's meant to help the communities to look at or begin inventories and assessments. They can fill it out, and it actually goes along very closely to what's in the manual itself. So let's talk about the background. First, 600 series recognizes the role of the local emergency manager. It is focused on the life safety aspect of community's floodplain management program, which translates into the EMA flood warning functions within a community. An effective flood warning program helps protect communities across the U.S. through early detection of the flood threat, increased response time, and a lowered impact from a flood event itself. So local emergency managers are the catalysts. They are the agents of change. In most communities, the EMA director is not the CRS coordinator. In some cases, they are one and the same, but if they're not, they need to know each other very well and be part of the same planning and response teams. The 3 activities we'll talk about today is 610. The first one, flood warning response. As I said earlier, it's talking about ample warning and what it does to prepare a community to prevent loss of life and property damage. 620 has been renamed levees. 630 has been renamed dams. Took the safety out, which seemed kind of ambivalent anyway. But their new names, very consistent approach. These address the actionable risk. In other words, people in harm's way should know what to expect, what actions they must take to protect themselves and their property. And these 3 are designed to do that. Their activities are organized in a similar fashion in the new manual. And as you go through 610, 20, and 30, you can see how it's all pretty much the same. They all look at these 4 bullets: advance notification of an impending flood, which they all recognize as a threat recognition. You issue warnings, which comes under warnings. The steps that are taken to protect the life of your citizens and reduce property loss is under operations. And to coordinate with critical facilities, which is critical facilities planning. Big thing is all 3 must have a outreach criteria, and these must go to our outreach product. that must go to the residents and businesses concerning the safety measures and what's important is before, during, and after a flood. So the 600 series does what? It measures those actions taken to protect life and property lost during a flood. So as I said in those 6 bullets, they all have the same criteria in all 3 activities. FEMA is very serious in evaluating flood warning programs to ascertain the functionality of what is in place within the community, what's actually there. And these 6 bullets on this slide recommend the minimum framework for a good flood warning program. So first, we'll talk about 610 flood warning response. I'll talk about this activity in more detail because that's where the majority of the communities receive points. The key thing here is in the box at V6, actually 2013. The credit criteria was revised, so we're trying to get the communities to really look at the attention of their pre-planning response actions, primarily at least 3 different flood levels. So this is a chart showing a comparison once again from the 07 to the 2013. We have the same 6 elements, however ORE, other response efforts, has been changed to a new name, which is Flood Response Operations. Big change is more points, which is a big win for the EMA community, 395 instead of 255. This is very important. That's where everyone applies for their credits. And 611.B, which is activity credit criteria. Big change from the previous activities. Many communities now have 610 credit that will no longer qualify if they don't improve their programs. So there's around, I think I said 44% is getting it now. My personal projection would be more like 33-35% will be receiving points in 610. To do this, you got to get credit in all these elements, these 4: flood threat recognition system, emergency warning dissemination, FRO, flood response ops, and CFP, critical facilities. You have to get a point or credit in every one of these elements to receive any credit in 610. The community must have adopted or must have a description of its flood hazard that includes the information shown in these 3 bullets, showing the flood depths, warning times, development of exposed to the flooding, such as number of buildings or critical facilities, and expected impacts to these things. Some of the things that the communities use as part of their flood warning system, such as on larger rivers, gauges may be maintained by the Weather Service, USGS, or another federal or state agency. Some not only tell you what the current reading is, but like the Illinois River example, Alabama shown here, they show predicted time and percentage of flooding. So you can go and click on them and see what's going on. Here in Illinois, you can see what the predicted crest is. We used this a lot during the Mississippi River flood in Mississippi last year. Also, if you're on the Gulf Coast or East Coast, as I saw a few weeks ago, especially in the New England area, coastal areas rely on the National Hurricane Center for their flood threat recognition system. We're all very familiar with that. You see it on various television channels. The program that's actually used is called HURRAVAX, Hurricane Evacuation, developed by FEMA, the Corps, and NOAA. This is actually showing the Hurricane Katrina, and it's as it started to make its last turn, heading into the mouth of the Mississippi and up into the state of Mississippi. This is an example of the slosh, which is sea lake and overland surge from hurricanes. I actually made this slide several months ago. This is Long Island. It's showing the different depths that are predicted for different types of surge. Communities can take the Hurricane Center's prediction. They run a slosh model to identify how high the water will go. And this is like a flood inundation or flood stage forecast map for coastal areas. As we all know, the hurricane qualifications or descriptions of Cat 1 through 5 is really talking about wind. It's not about surge. It's the surge that's very important. Number 3 in this activity, the community must have flood inundation maps, which are also known as flood stage forecast maps, that show at least 3 different flood or storm surge elevations. This is new. These are used in the planning of the community's flood response when different flood levels are predicted. That's where I think we'll probably lose a lot of communities who don't have this, but they have time to produce these maps. And it's very good for a good EMA department probably has the information now. They just haven't put it together in this format. So here's an example of a flood stage forecast map. This one actually shows more than 3 stages and the different colors. They can get more in depth, and you can actually count the structures that be affected as part of their warning program. So here's a more in-depth, you keep an eye on this cloverleaf. This is the village of South Holland. Here's an example of how a community has 5 different flood inundation, flood stage levels, and they're color coordinated. So the green level, you go up to orange, you see it gets bigger, blue, larger still, a lot of impact here, and then gray, which they call black, is their max flood. This is the chart that's turned into those actual levels, and then tell you how many homes will be affected, streets closed, and a critical facility. So I'm sure they know exactly what those are. They know who to identify and who to evacuate if needed. This is another newer type one I found. It's a Susquehanna Inundation Map Viewer. It's on the internet. The citizens can go to it. They can actually type in their home address, and it will tell them exactly what's going to happen at their particular property at different stages. So the big thing here, you have this great plan, but it has to be adopted. It has to be adopted by the community's governing body. It must describe the methods and warning devices that they'll use to disseminate these warnings. You got to talk about the specific flood response actions that are tied into those different flood levels or stages, and of course, they got to be adopted properly. This outreach, as everyone is probably familiar with under PPI or Program for Public Information, may be covered under Activity 330, and the ISO NFIP/CRS specialist will actually know the information on this when I do my reviews for this. A community must implement these outreach. There's got to be at least 3, if there is at least 3 days of advanced flood notification. They talk about how they do their watch warnings and safety at those different levels before, during, and after a flood. And if there's more than one source, say if you're on the coast, you may actually have a riverine and tributary flooding problem along with the coastal surge. You have to have different types of outreach to reach those different audiences. And the last thing, and this is in all the activities, you must have an exercise. This can be a flood or flood exercise, a levee failure, dam failure, or hurricane, because it uses the same amount of activities from the same players. It may just be a different topic. So real quickly, and this is only in this series where I'll show this type of slide, and if you go to the manual, you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. This is actually from a 1-hour presentation we did in webinar, which I'll not be doing here today. Let's give you an idea. You can actually go to the CRS website and pull down the PDF of the full webinar. So under FTR, or flood threat recognition, there's up to 75 points, and it's broken down into these different point levels. First, you have to have a system that tells you a flood's coming. This usually involves stream gauges that are monitored by people, or automatic reporting gauges, and the more automated it is, the more points you receive. Under 610 EWD, emergency warning dissemination, we have a different point system. It's up to 75 points. Now that you know a flood's coming, you tell people about it. These points are based on the different warning techniques that different communities have. For example, EWD4 credits door-to-door warning or mobile public address systems on vehicles, on police, fire, etc. Under FRO, flood response operations, which used to be ORE, FRO credits a plan for things that are done to reduce the threat to safety and property before and during a flood. Credits for specific actions taken at those specific flood levels that were identified in your maps. CFP, critical facilities planning, up to 75 points possible. It's based on the level of detail and coordination with those critical facilities within your community that will be affected by flooding, such as, say, fire stations. In this map, you got the cop shop and the fire department located. So under critical facilities, there's different types. Actually, there's 3 different ones in CRS. These are the definitions. You can see those in the manual. The first, critical facilities are vital to your flood response activities. They're very vital to your health and safety of the public in those 3 phases: before, during, and after a flood. And then there's a list of such things that we consider to be that type of critical facility. There's also those facilities that are flooded. They make a worsen a flood problem, such as hazardous materials facility, water utilities, wastewater treatment plant. As we know, they're always right next to the river. And also critical facilities, it must be accessible during a flood. It's good if you can protect it, but not if you can't get staff in or out and it's basically isolated. The last is 610 in 610, a storm ready community. This is actually designated by the National Weather Service. This is for storm ready status and tsunami ready communities. For our storm ready, the community must receive credit on the 4 elements we just discussed. Then you have the points, 25 points for storm ready and 30 points for tsunami ready. For TRC or tsunami ready, they must also have the National Weather Service designation. They must meet the CRS tsunami hazards mapping requirements, and that's found in the publication CRS credit for mitigation of tsunami hazards. And the community must have adopted a tsunami hazards operation plan. On storm ready, basically they're on the NOAA NWS weather site that says, yes, this community is storm ready. And that's 25 points. Under levies, the major changes is reorganized, of course, renamed, and the credit prerequisites include an inventory, and this would be a lot of effort for some people, of all areas protected by the levies, a documented maintenance program, and an outreach project to those protected areas. So you're basically following what 610 started, you're carrying it on into the levies. You can see in the 2000 manual it was 900 points, now it's 235, big reduction. However, only 2 communities receiving any points in that. So it's like a lot of points that the CRS program had allocated for something no one was really doing. The new one is broken down into these elements, and we'll talk about those briefly. This gives you a lot better plan. Credit prerequisites include, like I said, the inventory, maintenance, very important, and outreach to those protected elements. So these 4 elements, or the new 4 elements, are designed to closely coordinate a levee failure warning and response program to the community's emergency management program. This is the CRS definition of a levee. A levee is a man-made structure, usually earth and embankment, that is, and this is important, designed and constructed using sound engineering practices to contain, control, or divert floodwaters in accordance with that designated risk reduction level. So this is a good example of showing what we call a levee. Here it is in front of the house. There's the levees. This is not a levee. So we don't count road or railroad embankments that were not constructed as levees. A levee system that the community requests credit for must be operated and maintained by a public agency. The community must submit a map showing the location of each levee and the areas that would be flooded if it were to overtop, and the inventory of those buildings that would be impacted if that occurred. You can do this by showing the approximate protection level of the levee and the expected overtopping section. I'll show you a slide here in a minute of that. A map of the area that would be inundated. Importantly, a list of addresses of all property with insurable buildings in those areas, and a list of the critical facilities that would be flooded. This is showing a very simple schematic showing a levee. You just send it to the next highest ground, contain it or carry it over, and you show the area impacted by flooding caused by levee overtopping. That's how you can do your count. Or it could be a little bit more complicated. This was actually on the web as Fort Kent, Maine. And as I pulled it up, I noticed it said a levee protected area and it had different river gauge and what was there. So I then transposed this with the blue stars, and it's easy to roll in and actually count the structures that are in the protected area. And then that EMA person, the city, would know if this levee overtops, these were the people who are projected to be impacted. So if you got a levee, you got to be able to maintain it. The maintenance plan must be documented for all the levees, even the accredited levees and levees owned and operated by, say, the Corps, but you can't receive levee maintenance credit for a Corps or federal operated levee, but you can receive points for the other elements. The outreach, the big thing is sending an annual outreach project each year to all the occupied properties that would be subject to any kind of problems if it overtops. That can be part of your PPI credited under 330. The community must obtain credit for all four elements, just like in 610. LFR, Levee Failure Threat Recognition System, LFW, the Failure Warning, LFO, Failure Response Ops, and LCF, Levee Failure Critical Facilities Planning. You have to get points in all of these to get any points in 620. Also, of course, has to be adopted by the community body, just like in 610. There must be an exercise. It can be a flood, levee failure, dam failure, or hurricane. Our last activity we'll talk about is dams. And the old manual was, I think it was 10 pages, and the new manual is 15 pages. The major change shown there in the box, of course, reorganized, renamed, so they're all emulate each other, all the 600 series activities. State dam safety credit, and this was the really big change, was revised to reflect FEMA's new directions to have states more active with emergency management, and the credit prerequisites, which I just talked about. And levees is also the same for dams. You have to have the inventory of all areas subject to flooding to that dam and an outreach project to those properties. This shows the 07 points, 175 went down just a little to 160. Credit for State Dam Safety Program, SDS, has been reduced, but the credit for local dam failure warning response programs is going up. Presently, 1,101 communities receive the 630 SDS credit. Of these, only 2 have programs or emergency action plans for the dams that receive the additional credit under the DFP 1, 2, and 3. So this is taken from the National Dam Safety Program plan, our strategic plan for that fiscal years 12 through 16. And I thought it'd be interesting to y'all. This also shows where CRS ties into it. Their first goal, Objective 1, assess all high and significant hazard potential dams for the risk they pose to the life and property. Their goal 2, Objective 5, promoting EAPs, implementation, compliance, and exercises for all the high and significant hazard potential dams. We're really only concerned with high hazard dams. Goal 3, convey the risk posed by dams to motivate and affect change to the people. And number 4, improve awareness and understandings to the other professionals in the risk. So it's all kind of tying it all together. Sounds very familiar, much like the community rating system. This chart shows dam ownership in the U.S. at this point. Only 4% of the dams are owned by the feds, 2% by the state. You can see the breakdown. The biggest is private. Many states actually have regulations that require a high hazard potential dam to have an emergency action plan. Is what everyone wants, especially EMA type people. This little GIS product, I found it on a CD over 10 years ago. It's a dam in California. And if you watch along the upper reaches here, we'll see, I'll play it twice. You can watch as the dam fails and how it inundates different areas. And I'll do it one more time. I think this is a very nice product. And if you have a good GIS section, they can do this for your community. It's very easy then to transpose this over your parcel maps, building footprints, and get a good count. The big thing here is for 630, there's got to be at least one insurable building within the community that would be flooded if there's a dam failure. Of course, that's not a dam, that's just a house in Mississippi during the river flooding. I thought it was kind of a cool picture. I never went back later. It may have been a big swimming pool. So a high hazard potential dam is not a measure of efficiency, but rather potential level consequences for a failure. So if you're on a barrier island, you won't be receiving any 630 dam credit unless you have a dam on that barrier island, which is different from today. You can model a failure now. A lot of people are concerned about, well, the feds won't let us have the inundation area. What do we do? You can model a failure now with RAS. You would have to run it in the unsteady state and have some basic information about the dam, such as, say, height, stage, storage, curve for the impoundment, and make some assumptions about the type of failure and how long it takes to fail. You can also run HMS, and some think that this is actually a better program. Both are available free from the Corps. So that was the answer I was given for Any questions about, well, how do we come up with that dam failure inundation map if the owner won't give it to us? This thing, very important, got to have it. It's something FEMA is very hot and very serious about. As you can see here in the bullets, exactly what they're looking for and what CRS is going to credit. The other thing is expected impacts, which may be new to a lot of people. What will happen if it fails? Will we lose police and utility services? And if you have any secondary hazards, you got to think about things that your EMA director may have in their emergency operations plan. Just like the other two, you've got to receive credit in all four elements to get any credit for its local dam failure warning and response plan. So that's not different. It's just one and the same. They all emulate each other. Also, it has to be adopted by the community's governing body, and a requirement to send an outreach project each year to all the residences and businesses. This goes to those in the areas subject to inundation, and you can do this under your PPI under 330. If you have that, if you haven't already done that type of program, you may want to really look at it hard. It's a very good thing to do. Last thing, just like the other two, is an exercise. It can be the flood, levee failure, or dam failure, and that will qualify for this element. What I briefly discussed is the self-assessment. I highly recommend you go and do those. You can look at the complete PDF of the longer version of this presentation. We talked about the EMA linkages. This is very emergency management centric. When I was there at the task force, when I was part of the task force, I pushed that to make sure we cover the life safety portion of CRS. We do this to the increased points through 610, and I think there's a better organized levees and dams section now. So once again, this is the URL. I highly encourage you to go to that. What I like to do now is turn it over to the next presenter, Dr. Dave Curtis.
Okay, good afternoon, or still morning, I guess, in many places of the country. And here we go. Again, I'm Dave Curtis, and we're going to be talking about the Chehalis River Basin Flood Warning System. Now, I'm not presenting the flood warning system as a grand success story because it's a little bit too early. What we're really talking about is the journey that a flood authority is taking to implement a flood warning system in response to some major flooding 4 or 5 years ago. And hopefully we'll be able to cover some of the lessons learned so far in their journey. The Chehalis River Basin is about 2,660 square miles in west central Washington. You can see I-5 running north and south along the eastern part of the basin. And it's roughly halfway between Portland, Oregon, and Tacoma and Seattle, Washington area. In 2007, they had a major flood event driven primarily by an atmospheric river that caused several days of sustained heavy rain and snow over the basin. And shortly thereafter, in 2009, had another similar sized event. And you can see major portions of the community are underwater, pointing out the need to make sure that you're addressing needs of critical facilities throughout the community. And the major roadway that you see there is Interstate 5, which is the main north-south mode of transportation and commerce on the West Coast. And it was shut down for several days due to high water. In fact, so much of these communities were pretty much isolated from other parts of the state that one of the issues that they had to endure during this period was that the ATMs ran out of money. It kind of exemplifies the importance of planning ahead for these kind of events, and as our communities become more and more interdependent on a variety of new technologies. During this flood event, one of the major issues they had to deal with was how to get armored cars from the Federal Reserve banks in Seattle over what few mountain passes were still available and open, and dodging landslides and road outages and that sort of thing to get these caravans of $20 bills into town so people could actually function while they were recovering from the flood event. As a result of these floods, let me see if I can go forward here. I seem to be stuck for a moment. There we go. Okay. The communities in the Chehalis River Basin Flood Authority banded together and formed a group that was focusing on strategies that they could use on a regional basis to mitigate floods. So it was a series of counties, cities, towns, and at one point in time, an Indian tribe that was involved in the flood authority looking for common solutions. One of the first things that they looked at was improving their flood warning system, and they were looking at a three-phase conceptual design approach. They needed to figure out what the needs of the authority needs were, improve on their existing programs that were there in the basin, look for funding, and give the information to the flood authority for phases 2 and 3, which were basically a detailed design approach and a final construction. Let me back up just a little bit and put the flood warning system effort in context of the overall flood emergency preparedness. You can see in a flood hydrograph depicted at the top here, and we've overlaid it with the different elements of the whole preparedness process. First, we have planning, and then we have to figure out that we're going to have a flood and recognize the threat. Once we respond or recognize the flood threat, then we can respond. The flood peaks and starts to recede, and our recovery begins, and then we start over again in the planning, essentially trying to figure out what just happened and what can we do to improve the next time around. Improving on the flood warning piece of it really involves moving some of these bars a little bit to the left or earlier in time. After we get our planning done, we figure out where our critical facilities are. We want to be able to recognize the onset of a threat earlier and earlier in the game. Once we do that, we want to actually move the response, the initiation of the response, earlier in time as well. Because every additional minute that we have in our response time gives us an opportunity to mitigate damages that would otherwise occur. Then again, once you get to the flood peak, recovery begins, and we're on to our planning and figure out what happened and to do better next time. One of the important things to remember in the flood forecast environment, it is a constant trade-off between accuracy of the forecast and the timeliness. If we wait too long and collect as much information as possible, we're not going to have enough time to actually make a difference. If we get a flood forecast out too early, we may not have the credibility and may not be reliable enough to have people have enough confidence to actually take actions that would mitigate their flood damage. So it's a constant trade-off. And one of the ways to kind of look at that, if you look at the bottom hydrograph and where our flood threat recognition line is and the onset of our response, we're actually trying to make decisions very, very early in our flood hydrograph here. And in effect, we're making decisions without all the facts. And that's really one of the things that you have to get used to in flood warning, is making decisions when you don't have all the facts that you're ultimately going to have. Because if you wait to get all the information, it's going to be too late. So it's a constant balance. Getting back to our needs assessment, what they wanted to do was to figure out how to improve their precipitation monitoring, snowpack monitoring, improve the gauge network for streams, figure out what the reservoir levels and release plans were for the hydroelectric operation in the upper part of the basin. There was some concern to implement some kind of dam failure warning, and then everybody wanted to have some sort of web-based data and warning portal. Well, when we got done with all of that, we're in for quite a sticker shock. And they simply basically had a situation where when we went through the first needs assessment, it really wasn't a needs assessment. It was more of a wants assessment. They wanted more precipitation, they wanted more snowpack, but there were certain things that if you drill down, there are other ways to kind of skin that cat. For example, in snowpack monitoring, yes, they do have snow in the area. It's not the deep snowpacks like you have in the Sierra Nevadas, for example, the Rocky Mountains. You can add to the snowpack, but it's not a real, or add to the flood, but it's not a really, really, really big driver. And so including something like a temperature sensor with a rain gauge package would give information to forecasters about the incidence of whether the precipitation is falling as snow or rain, and how cold the temperatures are and whether or not things are melting in the upper parts of the basin. So we were looking for ways to basically get past the wants analysis and figure out what they actually need in this process. So that brings me to Dr. Day's first rule of network design. A little bit tongue-in-cheek, but there's a lot of truth to it. And that is, buy as many quality gauges as you can afford to install and maintain. Anytime I've ever looked at optimizing rain gauge network designs, for example, there were always add more rain gauges, and you add another rain gauge and your estimate of rainfall got better. Add another rain gauge, estimate of the rainfall got better and better and better the more gauges you added. Problem is, the numbers that would in effect optimize your estimate of rainfall always exceeded anybody's budget. So budgets really became the limiting factor. My whole career, I've only had a couple of instances where people had what I thought were too many gauges. So one of the things that I really try to focus on is to get good quality gauges, because you want to make sure that these things operate not only in the short term but in the long term, and you want to be able to afford to maintain them. So I will trade off numbers of gauges for higher quality gauges and the money to maintain them. And it's really, really important, because it doesn't matter if you put in a lot of gauges if they're not maintained and operating 4 or 5 or 10 years down the road when you need them during the next flood. So what we came to was basically a design-build approach to the flood warning system, and we wanted to improve the monitoring network by adding 10 new rain gauges. 8 were combinations of rain and temperature, and 2 were a combination of rain, temperature, and stream stations. We added an internet data and warning component, and also provided inundation mapping. Now, the inundation mapping not only is an important piece for the CRS, but it also helped connect the dots when people talked about wanting more stream gauges. Almost everybody we talked to wanted another stream gauge in their own backyard. Well, stream gauges are expensive to install and they're expensive to maintain. But when we drilled down to it, what they really wanted to know is how to relate the information that was at the gauges that were already existing in the area to their neighborhood, or to their house, or to their factory or manufacturing plant. So what we did, we took the existing flood insurance studies and the hydraulic models that were available for about 100 miles of the Chehalis River Basin and tributaries, and created inundation maps that connected the dots between forecasts by the National Weather Service at the existing rain gauge or stream gauge locations, and connected that to information about how deep the water was going to be in any given neighborhood along the rivers. Now, these areas all contribute to various aspects of the CRS credits. Obviously, flood recognition points are going to be gained by improving the monitoring network. Warning and dissemination points can be gained by improving the internet data and warning aspect. And then inundation mapping can apply to a couple of different areas. One, flood response operations, to know where the flooding is going to occur, and also ahead of time in your critical facilities planning efforts. One of the things that we wanted to do is to highly leverage the existing resources in the area, and we had the advantage of having a number of gauges already available. So we were able to collect that information and include it in our overall database. In talking to the National Weather Service and local stakeholders, we identified where in the basin they actually had some holes in the network based on their results from the 2007 and 2009 flood events, and so we came up with locations throughout the basin to fill in some of those gaps. Here's an example of what some of the sites look like. We chose the GOES telecommunication system to get the data from the remote site to the end users. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see a rain and temperature station, and we've got an arrow pointing to the satellite antenna. They're all solar powered, so there's no electrical requirements out in the field. A rain gauge, a temperature sensor, and an instrument shelter and a pole secured in a concrete base to secure everything. Down here in the lower right, we have a rain temperature and stream station. All the same elements, except there's pressure transducers that run out to the stream and installed along the bridge abutment there to measure the depths of flow at that point. As you can see from the pictures, all the gauges appear to be fairly rugged. We're talking about high winds, snow loading, and those kinds of things out in the field, and these things are set up to be visited routinely only a couple times a year. And so they have to be rugged, they have to be durable and reliable to last over the long haul. As I mentioned, the data collection was by satellite, so it goes up and hits the GO satellite down to a receiving station in Wallops Island, Virginia, and to a web server that's actually located in Colorado. The advantage of having the web server in Colorado, it puts a critical facility outside the basin. It's unlikely that disasters will strike both locations at the same time and take them out. So it's a way to add some robustness to the system. And then once the data is actually on the web server, then it's available to anyone in the basin that would have a computer, smartphone, an iPad, iPad mini, or any of the devices that can be connected to the internet. So anybody can literally access the data from just about anywhere in the basin or the world, for that matter, if you're hooked up to the internet. One note about the data communication. In this particular location, we actually chose GO satellite because there was so much infrastructure already in place, so many gauges in the area already using GOs. So we were able to collect the existing data and bring it all into our web server and make data from multiple sources and multiple agencies all available in one single portal. Other applications where you may have more flash flooding, you may want to have a terrestrial radio system that has a little bit faster response time than the satellite, which basically operates on an hourly reporting schedule and reports 15-minute data. We do have all of the sites set up on emergency reporting, so that if things get out of hand and the rainfall rates are too high or the stream elevations change too quickly, we can accelerate the reporting rates. The website is a portal to all things flood warning in the basin, where we have access with clicking on these icons to National Weather Service weather forecasts, National Weather Service rainfall forecast, the river forecast. We can then click on to get the flood inundation maps for individual neighborhoods, look at individual charts. We have maps that are available that show all the point data from about 120 some odd sensors that are now available in the system. We can post news and road closing information for the people in the basin to view, all from one website. This also supports the outreach because we also have not only information during the flood event, but also news and updates for the basin stakeholders throughout the year. We've seen this before. It's our forecast of the National Weather Service flood elevations. Note the different colors in the indications for minor, moderate, and record type flooding or major flooding. We tried to keep that same color scheme in the inundation maps for the basin. So in any given individual neighborhood, people can click down, get into their neighborhood, and then select the appropriate forecast elevation and see what parts of town are going to be underwater. Most of the elevations are one elevation for every foot, and we need 3 to qualify for points. Just some additional things that we found going through the process. We found some additional gauges that allowed us to actually redeploy some targeted hardware for certain sites, which increased the leverage of the hardware that we had for the system. We negotiated with TransAlta, the owner of the hydroelectric facility, to have access to their data system, so we didn't have to put resources there. We just hooked up to TransAlta via the internet. And then a new mapping program, which will come online at the end of this year, funded by not only the Flood Authority, but the Corps of Engineers, and we're going to increase the number of river miles mapped from 100 to approximately 200 for the basin. So in summary, we have the Chehalis flood warning system. They're on a journey to improve their flood monitoring system by adding to the rain gauge network, adding high quality gauges that are being maintained, added an internet data and warning capability, inundation maps, and what we haven't talked about was the recent addition of the new Doppler weather radar near the mouth of the basin, which really allows them a great view of storms coming into the basin. In summary, to bring your attention back to the National Hydrologic Warning Council, again, it's a great place for resources for all things related to hydrologic warning and automated flood warning systems. The website is www.hydrologicwarning.org, and come see us in Ponte Verde, which is near Jacksonville, Florida, next year for our conference. You'll see lots of professionals and get a lot of introduction to best practice in flood warning systems from all over the country. And now I'll just turn it back to Glenn.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. This is Devin. I'm the administrative assistant, and I received a few questions, and I wanted to just go over those real quickly. The first few were asking whether or not the slide presentation will be available online, and the answer is yes. We are going to be posting today's presentation to our website, and I will actually be sending out a follow-up email, and I will include the link to the website in that email for you later this afternoon. And on a related note, a couple of questions came in asking if the URL that Al mentioned in his presentation will be posted online, and you can find that again in the presentation that we will post. And I'll see if I can get that URL out of there and include that in the email also. And we have a question for Al specifically about his presentation, and that question is, how about bulkheads? Are they considered levees? They are, according to the Army Corps of Engineers.
This is Al. Not that I'm aware of. We take a look at, it'd be Dave Carlton and myself will really go through the specifics, but if it's not designated as a levee, by the definition, it's not a levee. So that may be something we need to look at.
Okay, thank you, Al. And that was our final question related to the presentation, and I just got another one coming in saying that they lost audio, and so I'm going to repeat that the slide presentations will be posted. This presentation will be posted to our website, hydrologicwarning.org, and I'm going to be sending out a follow-up email, and I'll include that information in that email for you this afternoon. And I will pass the control over to Glenn now to wrap things up. Glenn?
Yeah, thanks again, Al, Dave, and Devin. And I believe that this is a URL that some of the folks were asking about. They didn't have time to copy the URL when Al was speaking, so I quickly found it. And again, as Devin said, these slides will all be made available.
Thank you.
If you'd like to contact any of the speakers, Devin or myself, afterwards, or go back to our hydrologic warning website, here's the information on how you can do that. Here's our personal email addresses, and we'd love to hear from you. Speaking of getting your feedback, we have put together a survey online and asked that immediately following the conclusion of this webinar, if you'd please go to this website, take just a few minutes of your time to provide that feedback. We'd appreciate it. As Dave has mentioned, we'd love to invite you to come to Florida for our next conference. The 10th National Biennial Training Conference put on by the National Hydrologic Warning Council will be down there in Florida next June. I'd like to mention that we do offer at each of our conferences the Certified Floodplain Manager Refresher Course and Exam. So as you probably know, 12 continuing education credits are offered to conference attendees who complete this refresher course. So it's a great opportunity, and As Dave has mentioned, our goal next year is certainly to build an agenda that will attract and unite representatives from the floodplain and emergency management communities and combine them with our hydrologic warning professionals so we can all benefit from sharing past lessons learned from these hydrologic hazard events, and we invite you all to join us. This concludes today's broadcast. Thanks again to each of you for joining us today, and thanks to our presenters.